We're here to talk about how reflection helps lawyers as decision makers, how to teach reflection, and the basic rules of teaching reflection. Reflection in these terms means a habit of thought that observes, reacts, generalizes, and then critically analyzes the lessons that come from experience. Reflection is important for several reasons. All right? One, students need to be able to manage their own professional development, to manage their own growth as lawyers. The capacity to reflect gives them the tools that they need to exert autonomy. I'm fond of saying to my students that the supervision that they'll get when they graduate will vary from poor to none. And if that's the case, what that means is that they have to manage their own professional development. So that's number one. Second, a student really needs to be able to have the tools to deal with things that they would not have seen in their lives. A lot of students are quite young and haven't yet developed the poise necessary to manage the emotional or the value-based or the power dynamics of a given dispute. Training the capacity for reflection gives them this ability to manage these things earlier and with more poise and more maturity. And third, the capacity of reflection is central to the development of expertise. One of the things we know about expert decision making is that it involves recognition of patterns and the application of old patterns to new situations. The capacity to reflect allows a student to notice patterns sooner, to keep and develop a better library of these patterns in their mind, and therefore allows them to move towards expertise and truly effective representation earlier in their career. One question that people always ask is, how can you teach reflection? How can you help students become stronger at reflection? And the core way to do that is to give them practice in the task. And there are a host of different ways for doing that. The standard way of teaching reflection, at least in clinical courses, is to have students write journals, little pieces of reflective writing that focus on a particular event or a circumstance and ask students to analyze it and think it through. So let me just talk about the three rules for the effective teaching of reflection. All right. Rule number one, all right, the higher the stakes for the student, the greater the student's engagement with the problem, the richer and harder the opportunity for reflection, the more the student's capacity for reflection will develop. So that's number one. Number two, a teacher who's assigning reflection needs to commit to the relationship with the student about the reflection. This is not a one-way street where the student just tells the teacher and the teacher does not respond. The teacher needs to be able to engage with the student, to ask questions, to bring the teacher's own reflective capacity to bear so that the student can see different ways of understanding what they're thinking and reflecting about. All right? And the third rule is, to the extent possible, the teacher should set up opportunities for reflection that are complex, that have difficult parameters, that involve real human emotions, that involve real human values, that involve relationships that are challenging and complicated, that involve power disparities that are not easy to resolve. The more complex, the more real the problem, the stronger the reflection that the student will have to do to absorb it, and the more likely it is that they'll make progress in their own capacity to reflect. So high stakes, a teaching relationship, complex pragmatic decision making, having students do these things will make them better lawyers by improving their capacity to manage all the dimensions of the dispute, by allowing them to speak to what is in the dispute, not to what they imagine is there, but to what the real context of the dispute is, and by helping them to integrate these towards durable and reliable and even more just outcomes. I had a student just this semester who was working at a private nonprofit advocacy organization where they represented poor people in court. Her supervising attorneys decided that they would start to challenge a particular practice of a judge. In doing so, every time they challenged it, they knew that the odds were good, that the judge would rule against their client and force them to take the issue up on appeal. In fact, that was their goal, right? To force the judge to make a series of these decisions so they could establish a long-term practice. The student noticed this and thought hard about it, but also noticed that if they chose not to make that objection, chose not to raise the issue, the client would be very likely to get what they wanted. And so the student started to ask the question, was that a good thing? Is that the right way to handle it? Now, notice what this is about. This is a student who's using reflective process. She's identified a problem. She's articulated her own reactions to the problem. She's started to generalize from them and talk about what the lawyers should or shouldn't be doing in a way that allows her to think critically about what's going on at her law firm. Right? Being a good lawyer means making good decisions. Lawyers help clients make decisions every day, right? Both in transactions and in disputes. All right? To do that, lawyers have to work professionally, which means making decisions reliably, routinely, regularly over time. And to accomplish that goal, they need to have a method, a process of decision making. Reflection is the core of effective decision-making process.